You're not behind. Not by any objective measure. You have income, you have savings, you probably have a retirement account that gets a regular contribution. You might even own property. You've avoided the catastrophic mistakes, the debt spirals, the total neglect, the complete financial chaos that you know some people live in. And yet, there's this feeling, low grade, persistent, a quiet hum underneath the surface of your financial life that doesn't match the facts on the spreadsheet. It feels like falling short. It feels like running in place. It feels like no matter how many boxes you check, someone else already checked more. You tell yourself you're being irrational. You know that. You've done the comparison. You're doing better than most. The data is right there. But the feeling doesn't care about the data. And nobody is talking about why. Because the problem isn't your money. It's what you're measuring it against. Let's be honest about who you are, because this conversation only works if we start from an accurate place. You are not financially irresponsible. You're not someone who ignores their money, avoids their bank account, or spends impulsively without reflection. That's not you. You think about your finances, probably more than the average person. You track things, at least loosely. You make deliberate decisions. You've read things, listened to things, maybe built systems and spreadsheets and automated transfers that genuinely reflect a thoughtful adult trying to get this right. You feel the weight of financial responsibility, not because someone told you to, but because you internalized it early. You understand how compound interest works. You understand opportunity cost. You understand that small decisions accumulate over time. And because of all that, because you are intelligent and informed and genuinely trying, you probably expected the feeling to be different by now. You expected that once you hit a certain income level, the anxiety would soften. Once the emergency fund was fully funded, the low hum of financial worry would quiet. Once the retirement contribution was automated, the sense of financial adequacy would arrive and stay. But it hasn't stayed, or it arrived briefly, and then something shifted and the feeling reset. You're not dramatic about it. You don't talk about it much. It's not a crisis. It's just this persistent, low-level sense that you haven't actually arrived, that you're doing everything approximately right and still coming up somehow short. That feeling is worth understanding, because it didn't come from nowhere.
Here's what's actually happening. You never had a fixed standard. Not once. Not even at the beginning. You have been measuring your financial life against a moving target. And you have been doing it your entire adult life, without choosing it, without knowing it. Just automatically, the way breathing happens. That moving target is made up of the people around you, the people adjacent to you, the people you went to school with, the people in your neighborhood, the people you follow online, your colleagues, your friends, the person at the dinner table who mentioned what they paid for their car. That reference point moves every time your circumstances change. It moved when you got promoted. It moved when you relocated. It moved when your income crossed a new threshold. It moved when your social circle expanded, when your neighborhood changed, when your professional network started showing a particular kind of success. And the cruel part, the part that makes this so effective and so invisible, is that the target always sits just slightly ahead of where you are. Not wildly ahead, just enough to keep the gap alive. The feeling of almost there never resolves into arrival, because the there moves. This is not a character flaw. This is not ingratitude or ambition run amok, or some kind of psychological immaturity that more disciplined people have overcome. This is a deeply human cognitive process that your brain runs automatically, constantly, and largely without your awareness. And the troubling thing, the part that makes this particularly relevant for people like you, is that intelligence doesn't protect you from it. In many cases, it makes it worse. The more capable you are of tracking and analyzing your situation, the more sophisticated your comparisons become. The more data you have access to, the more precisely you can calculate exactly how far behind the shifting line you are. Your brain is not broken. It's doing something it was built to do. The problem is that it's doing it in a world your brain was never designed for.
The mechanism is called social comparison, and it means you can be objectively ahead and still feel behind. It's older than money. Human beings evolved in small, stable groups. The relevant question, the one your brain was wired to answer, was not, how am I doing objectively? It was, how am I doing relative to the people around me? In a small, stable group, that question had a stable answer. The reference group didn't change. The benchmarks were visible and roughly fixed. You could locate yourself, maintain your position, understand your standing. That information was genuinely useful for survival. That's not the world we live in anymore, but the brain didn't get the update. What happened instead is that the comparison process, a mechanism designed for a village of 30 people, got applied to a world of infinite visible reference points, social media, professional networks, neighborhoods that mix income levels in ways they never used to. The sheer volume of other people's financial signals that now pass through your awareness on any given day. And here's how the loop actually works inside you. You encounter a signal. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It could be a friend mentioning their renovation, a colleague's new car in the parking lot, a photo from someone's vacation, a conversation about private school tuition that assumes a certain baseline you're not sure you've hit. Your brain processes that signal instantly, and before any conscious thought occurs, it has already done a comparison. It has already located you in relation to that signal, and depending on where it places you, it generates a feeling. When it places you above or equal to the signal, the feeling is neutral. You don't notice it. There's no emotion because the brain doesn't flag things that aren't threatening. When it places you below the signal, even slightly, even in one narrow dimension, the feeling is discomfort, a low-level unease, something that registers as inadequacy or urgency or quiet anxiety. That feeling then drives behavior, often without you consciously connecting the cause to the effect. You start thinking about money differently. You reconsider purchases you'd already made peace with. You revisit plans you'd already settled on. You feel a vague pressure to do something, to make a move, to close the gap, to not fall further behind. Sometimes that leads to productive decisions. Sometimes it leads to spending you didn't actually want to do to signal a position you're not sure you occupy. Sometimes it just leads to a low, persistent restlessness that sits underneath your financial life like background noise. The critical thing to understand is that this loop does not require you to be behind. It doesn't require failure. It runs most effectively in people who are doing well, because doing well exposes you to higher reference points, which generates new comparisons, which produces new feelings of inadequacy, which restarts the loop. This is the trap that intelligence walks you directly into, not despite your capability, but because of it. This channel exists to map these patterns, the psychological mechanics underneath financial decisions that most people make without ever quite seeing them. If understanding how your mind shapes your money resonates with you, this may be a channel worth staying with. This doesn't show up as a dramatic event. It shows up in the ordinary texture of your financial life, in decisions that seem perfectly reasonable in isolation.
It shows up when you're choosing a neighborhood. You've done the budget, you know what you can comfortably afford, you have a number. But then you start touring places and you start to notice what the people in a certain area look like, what they drive, where they seem to work, and without consciously deciding to, you start adjusting the number. Not recklessly, you're not abandoning reason, but the reasoning shifts slightly. You find new justifications for the higher end. You tell yourself it's about schools or safety or long-term value. And those things may be true, but underneath them there's also a comparison happening, a quiet calculation about where you belong and what living somewhere slightly less visible would say about where you've arrived. It shows up in conversations with friends. Someone mentions what they paid for something, a kitchen renovation, a car, a trip, and something shifts in you. Not dramatically, just a recalibration. Before that conversation, you had no particular feeling about what you owned or what you spent. After it, something feels slightly off. Your car feels slightly older. Your kitchen feels slightly dated. Your last vacation suddenly occupies a different position in your mind. You haven't changed anything. The facts haven't changed, but the reference point has, and so the feeling has. It shows up in how you think about your salary. You know your number, you've accepted it, negotiated it, built your life around it, but then you learn, through a conversation, through a LinkedIn post, through a job posting you weren't even looking for, what someone with your title, your experience, your background is apparently making somewhere else. And suddenly your number feels different. Not because your expenses changed, not because your needs changed, because the target shifted, and now your number is on the wrong side of it. It shows up in major decisions about education. You weren't particularly invested in private school or a certain type of college. The public options are fine. You went to a public institution yourself. But then the conversations at the school gates or at the dinner table start carrying a certain weight. Names of institutions, tuition figures mentioned casually, the quiet implication that certain choices are what serious, capable parents make, and you start running numbers you hadn't planned to run, considering options you hadn't budgeted for, feeling a vague pressure that has very little to do with your actual child and very much to do with where you need to be seen to place. None of these are irrational decisions in isolation. None of them mark you as reckless or vain. But in each one, there is something beyond the stated rationale. There is a comparison running quietly in the background, shaping the emotional weight of the decision, making some options feel like falling short and others feel like holding ground. And the pattern, repeated across years of decisions, adds up. The cost of this pattern is not usually a single catastrophic decision. That's what makes it so easy to miss. It's not the moment where you obviously overextended, made a terrible bet, or ignored a clear warning. Those events are visible. They're legible as mistakes. You can point to them, learn from them, and recover from them. This cost is quieter. It accumulates in the gap between what you actually need and what you feel compelled to maintain. The house that's slightly larger than what your life required, not dramatically larger, just enough to meet the target you'd absorbed from the people around you. The payments are manageable, the mortgage isn't going to ruin you, but there's a number locked into your monthly fixed costs that will never fully free up. A flexibility you quietly traded away for a position in someone else's invisible ranking. The career decisions shaped partly by what a certain title or company communicates to the people who matter to your comparison group. The job you didn't take because the role felt like a step back in visible status, even though the work would have been more interesting and the equity might have been meaningful. The path not taken because the comparison math in your head didn't support it. The savings that didn't accumulate because the spending that happened wasn't irrational. Each individual decision made sense, but the aggregate of comparison-driven decisions left remarkably little margin. Year after year, the lifestyle kept pace with the target, and the target kept pace with the income, and the gap between income and savings stayed narrower than it needed to be. The freedom that keeps getting deferred.
Think about the last time you felt genuinely financially satisfied. Not relieved, not temporarily reassured, actually satisfied. Now, think about what changed, what arrived in your awareness, a conversation, a piece of information, an image that moved the feeling somewhere else. That moment, that shift, is worth examining. And then there's the anxiety. Not the acute kind, not the financial emergency that announces itself clearly and demands an immediate response. The low ambient kind that just lives in the background of your life. The feeling that you should be doing more with your money, that your decisions haven't quite been right, that people around you are getting ahead of something you haven't identified yet, that you're perpetually almost there, but the arrival point keeps moving. That anxiety is expensive, not in money, but in attention, in mental bandwidth, in the cognitive overhead of a comparison process running quietly in the background of every financial decision you make. The people who seem less anxious about money are not, by and large, wealthier than you. They often aren't. What they have, often without knowing it, is a more stable reference group, a target that isn't constantly shifting, a way of measuring financial progress that doesn't require continuous recalibration against new external signals. That's not a personality trait they were born with. It's a pattern. And like all patterns, it becomes visible once you know what you're looking at.
Here are some questions to sit with. Not to answer out loud, not to solve, just to notice what happens inside you as you consider them. When you make a financial decision, large or small, do you find yourself thinking about how that decision would look to specific people in your life? Not in a general sense, specifically to your colleagues, your neighbors, your family, particular friends. When you learn about someone else's income, net worth, or major purchase, does your own financial situation feel different afterward? Not different because the facts changed, but different because something in you recalibrated. When you imagine reaching financial independence, the version where you have genuine freedom and flexibility, do you have a clear picture of what that looks like? Or does the picture keep changing as your reference group changes? When you explain financial decisions to yourself, are the explanations primarily about what you need, or are they also partly about maintaining a position in a ranking that no one ever officially established? If your income doubled tomorrow, but the incomes of everyone in your immediate social and professional circle also doubled, would you feel ahead? These are not trick questions. There are no wrong answers, but there may be honest ones that are uncomfortable, and the discomfort itself is information.
Once you can see this pattern, it changes the texture of your financial life in a subtle but significant way. Not because the comparisons stop. They don't. The mechanism is too deep, too automatic, too embedded in how human minds process social information. You will continue to notice what others have, continue to feel the pull of upward comparison, continue to experience the quiet recalibration that happens when the target shifts. But seeing it, actually recognizing the process in the moment it's running, creates a small gap between the signal and the response. Instead of a comparison signal producing an immediate feeling that produces an unexamined behavior, there is briefly the possibility of observation. You notice that a comparison has just occurred. You notice the feeling it generated. You notice that the feeling is doing something, creating pressure, shifting your sense of what's adequate, quietly proposing a different set of financial priorities. You don't have to do anything with that observation. The point isn't to fix the pattern in real time, it's just to see it. Because most of the damage this pattern causes comes from its invisibility, from the fact that the comparison is running and the feeling it generates is shaping decisions, and the decisions are accumulating, all without the process ever surfacing into conscious awareness. The intelligent adults who feel most trapped by this pattern are usually not the ones making the worst financial decisions. They're often making quite good decisions, but doing so with a persistent, draining anxiety that the decisions never quite resolve. Because they're solving for the wrong variable. They're solving for the target, and the target, by design, cannot be solved for. There's a different question available, a quieter one that has nothing to do with where you stand relative to the people around you, and everything to do with what you actually need your financial life to provide. That question is harder to hold because there's no external data to anchor it. You can't look at a colleague's car and derive the answer. You can't scroll through someone's vacation photos and extract it. It requires a kind of internal clarity that the comparison process is constantly disrupting. But it's worth knowing the question exists, and it's worth noticing when you're not asking it.
You check the boxes. You've been checking them for years. And somewhere in the gap between what the boxes say and what you feel, there is a process that has been running quietly, shaping your financial life in ways that no spreadsheet captures and no financial plan addresses. Not because you've been careless, because you've been human. The target was never fixed. The arrival was always conditional on a receding condition. The satisfaction you were working toward was always being defined by a reference group that moved whenever you got close. Seeing that clearly, not as accusation, not as failure, but as a mechanism that has simply been operating without your full awareness, is what this kind of examination is for. You don't need to resolve it today, but here's something specific to take with you. The next time that feeling shows up, the low hum, the quiet sense that you are somehow behind, pause for just a moment before you do anything with it, and notice who you just compared yourself to. That's where the answer is, not in the feeling itself, in what triggered it.